Welcome friends to another 40k video. Today we look at Vulkan, who hunts Magnus the Red in the Webway during the Siege of Terra. Spoilers for Echoes of Eternity by Aaron Dembski-bowden throughout. Let's get straight into it. Magnus summons Vulkan and asks for Vulkan to let him in so he can heal the damage their father has done. Vulkan can stand with him, he says. Vulkan returns to the throne room with Malcador after getting the message. Malcador observes, much like his father, Magnus keeps up a pretense of who he is, and then, for a moment, the Golden Throne drops its barrier, and Vulkan runs into the Webway to hunt Magnus. Malcador has explained the rules of the place to him. One was the intent of where you want to go matters, and using this leads him to the Lord of Prospero. They speak, and Magnus says his knowledge of prophecy allows him to manipulate, and Vulkan will simply play out the part assigned to him here. Before his eyes, Magnus shifts between the brother he was and the demon he has become. Magnus says now Vulkan will say he must fight with a heavy heart. Vulkan says this person was Magnus, and now he's the flaws and weaknesses of Magnus laid bare, and asks, does he regret the choice he has made, the deal? Magnus says no, because he can manipulate energy his brother cannot conceive of, and he's immortal. Magnus continues to talk, and Vulkan tires of the conversation and throws his hammer, and for a second he sees the real Magnus, lost in ritual. The hammer hits the barrier. Vulkan grabs it, now it's identified, and pounds on it with his hammer, and then suddenly Vulkan is somewhere else, on his homeworld, Nocturne, and then things keep changing. Vulkan insists to himself he's still in the Webway to try and get back to where he was, and this leads him back to Magnus, and he says, this now ends, demon, and realises Magnus is using his magic where he is, and not at the portal where his father is trying to stop chaos coming through, because Magnus cannot find the portal to their father's throne room. That passage in the Webway is based on strength of focus and spirit, and now it defies Magnus because of the power he's enthralled to. They fight briefly, but Magnus breaks his brother's back. But of course Vulkan, with the abilities of a perpetual, begins to heal, and this continues this scenario until Magnus says enough, and that can he see him behind Vulkan, bringing him back. I think this is a reference to the Emperor, but the battle is taking its toll too on Magnus. Vulkan brings the hammer down on the thigh of the Primarch of the Thousand Suns, who cries in pain, and the energy of Magnus, trying to find the doorway, erodes. Magnus states the Emperor's plan would never have worked. Vulkan says this is an execution and not a trial, and charges him, but his knees lock, and Magnus holds him in stasis, and takes off Vulkan's head. Revived shortly after, Vulkan pounds on Magnus's barrier. After 19 blows from the Primarch, it breaks, and save a telekinetic shove from Magnus, the hammer may have ended him then and there. Then this pattern continues, and with a release of concussive force in the end, Magnus hurls Vulkan from the bridge. When he returns, they fight on, but Vulkan, no matter the death he is given by Magnus, always comes back, be it transmutation or exsanguination, i.e. draining blood from someone. He would not stop, and Magnus paid when he returned each time, until he was down on a knee, wings broken, and he begs Vulkan for no more. Vulkan says Magnus is still attacking their father. Magnus says finish him and let ignorance triumph over truth. Vulkan hesitates, but then goes through with it. As the hammer falls, he is then shown by Magnus Prospero as it was before and after the wolves had laid waste to it. They're in a mindscape, and in reality, Magnus says they still fight. Here Vulkan says he will listen. Magnus says the Imperium is a lie. They all say it's necessary, but they know the Emperor is a tyrant, who built it on, as Magnus tells it, the lies of a would-be god and the violence of his crusade. Would a good monarch do that? Vulkan notes these thoughts are how chaos got to Magnus. Magnus says the Imperium must be swept clean. Vulkan says how can what Horus and Magnus do be justified? Magnus says he only ever defended himself and his legion. Vulkan says that Magnus is going to make his own species extinct. How could he possibly say he did nothing wrong? Magnus retorts that chaos is needed by necessity. It will bring illumination to replace ignorance. Vulkan counters, did the creatures of the warp measure this need for necessity? Magnus shows Vulkan Prospero again and asks how would Vulkan have reacted if it had been Nocturne. Vulkan says Magnus has allied with Horus, who lied to Russ to cause the raising, and says regarding the Webway project, Magnus was warned not to interfere in it. But Magnus believed he knew best. Magnus insists their father should have told him, and Vulkan observes Magnus thinks he's free when he is in fact caged. Magnus shows Vulkan a vision of when their father had offered him a new legion if he had forsaken Horus. Vulkan says what he saw was the last unstained shard of Magnus's soul beg their father to save it, but he refused. So Magnus has either imagined what he saw, or perhaps that's what the Emperor showed him. Vulkan says chaos is a layer of emotion behind reality, a poison that has achieved near sentience. It makes its prey into willing victims in their own damnation. Magnus the Red's fate is sealed. Magnus asks how Vulkan could know this, and it's hinted the Emperor is speaking through Vulkan, or Magnus is thinking he is, and 3 strikes of the hammer breaks Magnus's body. Vulkan has a last blow, and Magnus begs, "Father, wait." Magnus says, "I see now, forgive me." The Emperor tells Vulkan he's lying, that is, Magnus is lying, and to finish him, and both Primarchs strike each other to finish each other off at the same time. Magnus looks at the arcane science their father has put into Vulkan, and how he would unmake him, and Vulkan collapses, with black skin rupturing. But this method is done hastily and doesn't finish off Vulkan, and so it's not a perfect kill on him. Vulkan somehow fights and swings his hammer, and the head of Magnus the Red is removed. Vulkan endures as a skeleton after neither dead or alive, and it would have to fight its way back, with its passage heard by the grinding of a fleshless grip on a hammer. Now friends, I turn this over to you. Did you enjoy the fates of these 2 brothers? Or do you come down on either side in terms of whichever of them may be right? Do you think Vulkan is a lot like Kenny from South Park? Comment down below.